Right, right. Well, I'm going to take that HI, humane intelligence, as a marketing material,
Go
and
for it.
you're going to be getting royalties for it. Hey everyone, my name is Richard of Anyreach Roundtable, and I'm here today with Alec from Accelerating Leaders. Very excited to have you here today.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'd love to tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You've had a pretty impressive background and career in the hospitality and service management industry. Working with big brands like Disney, the Ritz-Carlton, and so on and so forth. Can you share with our audience just what led you to Accelerating Leaders and a little bit about your background in the hospitality industry?
I've definitely made a little bit of magic, along with those Disney lines. I started my career with my boots on the ground, working in hotels across New England, throughout Orlando, and elsewhere on the East Coast, with the Disney organization. At Walt Disney World with the Ritz-Carlton in Boston outside of Washington, D.C., and then progressively pivoted from management roles there into management roles in the corporate realm. So I was working at the Ritz-Carlton corporate office in loyalty marketing, and then for Marriott International more broadly in global quality. And at that time, I supported about 7,500 hotels worldwide across their technology stack as it related to things like guest satisfaction surveys, mystery shop audit programs, and advancements in analytical technologies to help hotels figure out how to create better and better guest experiences.
Wow.
After a great run with those companies, I then pivoted into the consulting realm. And so now I do similar work with other organizations, both brand names and boutiques, helping them think about how they can not only develop great guest experiences, but how they can also elevate their employee experiences along the way.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And sounds like quite a journey in your career. And now you're a thought leader and expert, and everyone is hounding for Alec to help them with their business. And just kind of switching gears a little bit as we kind of think about AI and how that's being integrated into the hospitality industry. We've seen chatbots, handling reservations to, AI-powered personalization, if you will. Based on your experience, how do you see AI transforming the hospitality industry while still maintaining that human touch?
At the end of the day, I think about artificial intelligence in many respects the same way that I think about a professional in the service space, because that's ultimately what guests are expecting to a certain degree.
Mm,
Whether we're using a chatbot or calling an agent on the phone, there's a general presumption that, or at least an aspiration, I think, amongst guests, that either I'm talking to a person or if I'm talking to a robot, I better be as close to a human as possible in that regard. So I think context, consistency, completeness
mm.
of responses, clear communication, all components of that dynamic.
Got it, got it. Yeah, I think especially in the hospitality industry, it's definitely the expectation of the customer. It's a pretty high bar, right? So
Right.
if you're gonna introduce like an AI solution, as you mentioned, it better be pretty close or maybe even better in some circumstances than what they're traditionally kind of used to. So super, super cool.
And along those lines, if I can add, I think the industry has almost to a certain extent a tripping wire when it comes to the world of
Mm,
AI because it is so innately human. One of the beautiful things about hospitality as a word is that it applies both to the warmth and welcoming that we receive as well as to the name of the industry. But
mm,
along those lines, I think guests are predisposed to think about receiving that human touch. And whether it's off putting or unwelcome, I think we in the AI space have to figure out how do we help people cross that bridge from a commercial standpoint to deliver seamless service, and how can we also help guests understand that they can receive even better service through AI as well.
right, right. That's super interesting. I mean, when you think about hospitality being obviously very service oriented, um, considering there's so much buzz around AI and in the hospitality industry, what do you think people are getting wrong about implementing AI, especially since it's such a high touch human experience?
There are a couple of snags. One of those I've noticed is completeness. So, for
Mm,
example, if we were to ask, I'm going to say a generic AI agent, does your hotel allow pets? One
mm,
answer might succinctly be yes, but a more complete answer might be yes, we allow maybe small dogs, or yes, we allow small dogs, as we will also be assessing a cleaning fee of X amount of dollars. So
Mm,
making sure that that systems are able to provide complete and thorough answers not only helps to set the guest expectation up, but also helps the hotel or the restaurant or whatever hospitality operator we're talking about live up to the expectations that they're aspiring toward.
got it. Just switching gears, just to be a little bit more fun with our audience. Since you worked at Disney, right? There's obviously some pretty amazing characters under the Disney brand. When do you
Yeah.
think Disney's gonna have an AI Mickey Mouse?
I wouldn't be surprised if Disney already has one. They've been working on all sorts of really crazy innovations, especially with the soon to open Epic Universe on Universal's property in Orlando coming next month. I think we're about to see a massive spike on the theme park front between both those companies and others. But they oftentimes set the tone for a lot of the technology that reaches the rest of society. And in many respects, theme parks have always been almost the testing grounds for emerging tech, especially consumer tech. And I think as soon as little kids get comfortable with an AI Mickey Mouse, that think of all the floodgates that are going to open after that.
Yeah, I mean that'll be definitely interesting. Hearing the calls and what folks, or not even folks, like children are saying to, their favorite characters under the Disney umbrella. So,
Yeah.
looking forward to that future for sure.
It opens up another opportunity, though, going back to some of the tripping hazards. Every brand is unique. Every character is unique in the case of intellectual property. And as we think about AI, one of the other important things is to remember the context or the character or the persona that the AI is representing. And I'll give you an example from the hotel side. If we were talking with Ritz-Carlton guests via voice assistant, it would be appropriate to use more formal language, to have a little bit more precision and diplomacy and the tact. If we were talking with guests on the flip side of, say, a Moxie hotel, a millennial and Gen Z forward brand, we can get a little bit more fun and funky with the dialogue, with the tone, with the "Hey guys" or "How's it going." That conversation would not really be welcome for every guest of a Ritz Carlton. So understanding that context, understanding what would be appropriate for Mickey Mouse to say versus Buzz Lightyear, also part of the same dynamic.
Right, right. It's interesting. Most folks, when they think about AI, they just think about it as, a technology solution or problem, right, to solve. But really, when it comes down to AI, it's really the human experience, right? The
Right.
psychology, the social, and so forth. But what's interesting about that is like really trying to break that down into a science
Hmm.
so that you can actually replicate it with AI to, as you mentioned, be consistent with the brand voice, the tonality, and all those things that obviously, whether it's an IP of a persona or the actual company and brand, that adheres to that same human experience. But somehow,
Exactly.
yeah, break it out into like bytes, zeros and ones, if you will, so that AI can actually replicate it. So,
Completely, completely. One piece of advice that I like to give to colleagues who are working within the AI space, less so on the kind of the consumer side within the hotels, but more so your colleagues, for example, Richard, is as easy as it is to talk about AI and artificial intelligence, to occasionally swap in the word humane intelligence for
mm,
artificial, because it, I think, is a much needed reminder from time to time about the fact that part of the humanity isn't just about the intelligence, but also about other aspects like emotional intelligence, like leveraging context. And it can slightly change the paradigm in a way to make what you just said all the more palatable.
right, right. Well, I'm gonna take that HI, humane intelligence, as a marketing material,
Go
and
for it.
you're gonna be getting royalties for it.
And we've got witnesses here on the podcast.
Yeah, right. Well, that's actually the first time I heard that, so that's super cool to think about it because artificial intelligence, yeah, it's got its negative connotations in some sense, right? And so, as you kind of think about some of the concerns of, and we've heard this across multiple different industries, organizations, even individual contributors,
Mhm.
that AI might diminish the personal nature, right,
Mhm.
of human-to-human conversations. And I'm assuming this would obviously apply even more so in the hospitality industry. How do you see AI as an enhancer of human service rather than a replacement?
I think it comes into play in two ways. in one instance, let's say that we still want a human to human engagement, so a
Mhm.
guest talking, for example, to a concierge. Well, if the guest is asking for tips on dining reservations in this particular part of town with this particular type of cuisine for this number of people with this sort of a vibe, unless the concierge already has that existing knowledge, having access to AI can help them very rapidly search
Mhm.
and fill in the gap with greater efficiency, so that um, essentially their knowledge base is multiplied and their ability to serve the guest is not only enhanced in terms of speed but also in terms of the quality of the recommendation that they're able to make. I especially with regard to knowledge management, I think that's where there are massive AI capabilities in the hospitality space. There's so much information, whether it be about local environments, about brand standards in the case of multi-unit chains, and having AI that can support professionals with that know-how can be really, really powerful. And then, of
Mhm.
course, there are opportunities for guests to connect directly with AI, whether it be through voice assistants, chatbots, and the like. But the key that I would point back to is do everything in our power to make that a human or human-like experience. Um, Here's a niche example of something I noticed the other day. Some chatbots will respond instantly as soon
Mhm.
as a request is made. Others will take a moment to pause, and you see the dot 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 ellipses. Others, ChatGPT being an example of this, will have a slight pause and then kind of a
The words come
thread of
out, right?
exactly, and it kind of comes out. And I think it's important from a UX standpoint that we continue to do a lot of research in this space to figure out which of
Mhm.
those models feels most human, but at the same time is most accepted by the guest. There's kind of a tricky thing because I think guests are smart enough to know when they're talking to an agent or not.
Mhm.
And so being too human like might seem suspicious. At
Mhm.
the same time, feeling almost kind of programmatic or coded might not make the guest feel again that human touch. So a
No.
UX challenge I think still ought to be solved.
Yeah, no, that I think you brought up a great point. I mean, there's obviously text-based conversations with AI where the UX is, depending on the type of customer and use case, you might want to have, pauses and so forth.
Right.
But when it comes to speech and voice with AI, we've realized that as well, like conversational UX is what we're calling it,
Hmm, hmm.
where if you're too fast to respond, and we've kind of quantified this, the milliseconds for response time.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
it's around
exactly.
like 250 to 400, it starts feeling like, whoa, this thing is like answering my question before I finish my question, and it
Hmm.
feels a little, it's superhuman, kind of cool, but at the same time, you're too much AI, right?
Right, right,
And
exactly.
anywhere from like that 500 to 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second, it feels more natural, right?
Yeah.
And some of the stuff we bake into our voice agents is back channeling, right? The ums, the
Mhm.
sure's, the pauses, the filler words. That actually makes it more natural than just being very robotic. Even if you can get a response out very quickly, if you don't have that back channeling, it just feels very like, it's too robotic, right?
Exactly,
So
exactly.
some of those
One of the
nuance.
other things that, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. One of the other things I
No,
was thinking about yesterday, um, I was talking with an agent, and immediately after I input a comment into the chatbot asking a question, I got not only an immediate reply, but a very long immediate reply.
yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, I already knew that this was AI, but now I'm all the more sure because no human being could have typed,
Like all
an
that.
essay in a millisecond. But I think that that's where there are ample lessons from the world of like mobile technology and
Mm,
messaging in text format, like having instead of one large block of text, separating out perhaps paragraph by paragraph. So at least there's an illusion that all right, they had enough time to type one paragraph while they pressed enter and then type the other one, and I'm reading. There's kind of a sequence there that feels a little bit more paced and
mm,
conversational. To your point,
mm.
that's another strategy that I think is worth UX designers exploring.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I joke with my team that you definitely don't want to train an AI based on how I type, because the
Yeah,
way I type is very ADHD, if you will. So in Slack, I never send a couple sentences or a paragraph, right? I'm just like rapid firing
yeah,
multiple
yeah,
sentences. And by the time folks, get to my message, it's like 30 lines, and they're like, I don't know what I'm reading. And I'm like, all right, let me improve my process and pre-train myself to be better on that. But yeah, I mean, if AI followed the same patterns I did, I think it'd be make for a poor user experience there.
Yeah, yeah. There's that happy medium, right?
Right, right. And so, as someone leading professional development in the service industry, what challenges have you encountered when training, stakeholders, managers, even people that are maybe working in tandem with AI solutions, while still maintaining kind of that, high touch service standard and overcoming their objections?
I think that the most common objections tend to be things along the lines of AI is either replacing or taking my job. AI is difficult to use. AI is inaccurate. Um, AI doesn't provide the level of service that I can provide. And so I think all of those are entirely fair and valid concerns. The first thing that I always recommend is facing the facts that those are legitimate, both challenges and opportunities. As we talked about already, I see AI as a massive supplement to the way in which service gets provided, and I think it changes the way in which we as a society will come to expect service too. And there's part of that pendulum swing that I think is just going to take some time to adopt. But some of it also comes down to messaging. A lot of it comes down to the user experience that we talked about earlier. I'll
Mm,
give you an example. I think a lot of the frustration that consumers are facing right now with AI is almost a lingering of past versions of less sophisticated forms of AI. We've
right,
had chatbots on websites for at least a decade, right?
right, right.
But for so much of that time, there were really decision tree oriented chatbots. So you get the
Mm,
prompt and you get three options and you can pick one. It's basically the equivalent of a phone tree, when we're dialing.
right.
And the answers are completely canned and rarely ever helpful. But I think consumers still feel kind of burned and annoyed by that and
Yeah.
want to, the how often do we imagine people screaming into their phone, talk to an agent, pressing zero,
Yeah,
trying to
always
get to
press zero.
somebody.
Yeah, exactly. That's the hack. Just I
Exactly.
don't need to listen. I just keep pressing the zero button. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be really, really frustrating, especially because people tend to want to call or contact for two
Mm,
main reasons. Either they want to buy your product or they have an issue with your product.
mm,
Right? They need help in some way, shape, or form. And
right.
in the first instance, we obviously want to, if they want to give us their money and we can provide a service in exchange, let's not leave that money on the table.
Right.
And if there's a problem arising, let's not lose money. Let's not lose our guest, most
Mm,
importantly, from a reputational standpoint in terms of delivering a reliable and quality service. That's critical. But let's also make sure that we're not having any liabilities or risks along the way, too.
right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a great point. The version one of AI, if you can even call it that, really
Yeah,
wasn't AI.
exactly.
But folks have definitely experienced a pretty poor experience. So overcoming kind of the new generation of where AI is now is there's still a bit of adoption that needs to happen with guests, consumers, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So I think we're getting there, but baby steps for sure.
Exactly.
Um, and as you're kind of looking ahead, how do you see AI impacting essentially the hospitality and service industry in the next 3 to 5 years? And what new opportunities or challenges should service leaders prepare for?
One area that I'm really curious about is on the meetings and events space. So imagine a large company is bringing in their team from many different destinations, or they're bringing in clients and having a conference or promotional show. The logistics associated with that are enormous. A lot of the most complex logistics are the really tactical ones, figuring
Mm,
out what are people's arrival and departure dates at hotels so that we can make corresponding reservations. What are the flight plans that are needed? And I can anticipate a lot of those, the logistical aspects, especially on these large scales, can be handled by AI agents who are essentially purchasing on behalf of companies and playing that intermediary role.
mm,
I think mass personalization will also increasingly be a focus, particularly in hotels and restaurants, even when it comes to making tailored recommendations toward a guest. Right now, you have to have a dialogue with typically a real human being at the front desk or over the phone to be able to get local recommendations on things to do while you're visiting a particular city, or find the fastest way to get to whichever destination you're going to.
right.
And increasingly, AI can offer more tailored responses at a personal level while still reflecting, like we talked about earlier, the voice that the brand wants
Mm.
represented with the technology that it's using.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about all the hotel and motel stays that I've been at, where usually at the lobby there's like this big, I don't even know what you call it, but they have all these pamphlets,
Yeah.
right? Different services and activities to do and locations to see. I'm still surprised that hasn't been digitized, at least even without AI, right? Where you could just see what that is on
Right.
like your location. But I can imagine, AI could consume all those pamphlets, right? And you could just call in and say, hey, listen, I'm coming X date, and,
Hmm.
my kids are interested in, water sports and whatnot. What do you have, right?
Exactly.
So there's definitely a lot more, I think, to be done there.
Hmm.
So that's pretty exciting. And you mentioned the events and conference spaces of like, being proactive and automating all the logistics, right, to get to a
Right.
location with corporate customers or maybe even consumers to handle that end to end. One of the things that we've seen and one of the partners we worked with, their end clients are like healthcare companies. And traditionally, their end clients are very much into conference and events. And we actually created, or we had a thought exercise, it was a little bit philosophical, of how do we bring AI voice into the physical world,
Right.
right? And what we actually invented for them, and we're the first ones to do it, where we created a QR code
Hmm.
with the tagline, "Can you tell if I'm AI?" And essentially, they printed out these big banners, right, with the QR code. They had booth girls and guys wearing T-shirts with the QR
Hmm.
code, pamphlets with the QR code, and every lead that came to the conference, even if they didn't come to the booth, obviously saw this QR code from a distance, scanned it, and then they were hit with a web page to give us their contact information, like your name, your email, your phone number, and then also their website. And then when they hit submit, we actually scrape their site,
Hmm.
create a personalized voice agent for that specific lead. So I was like, hey, Bob from Yelp, I'm Amanda, your personalized agent. Do you have any questions about your business? And then they can ask you, right?
Huh.
Uh, it was a pretty cool funnel. And what ended up happening is over 2 months and two conferences, we generated about 100 leads of C-level decision makers, 100 million plus businesses. Um, and what was pretty exciting about that was we were still getting leads after the conference.
Right.
Because what ended up happening is these folks took these physical pamphlets, started sharing with their friends and colleagues. Oh, you got to try this thing out. And so while we're sleeping, this thing is still creating leads for us, which is
Exactly.
a pretty fun item there.
And you really put the Turing test to the test there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, fingers crossed that it doesn't mess up. Um, and actually, as we talk about the future of AI, most of what we're talking about here is more in a digital format, if you will, like chatbots or, phone call.
Mhm.
But with the hospitality industry being very human and high touch,
Mhm.
there's obviously a physical element,
Totally.
right? And so not talking about replacements, but in terms of enhancing the
Mhm.
physical human to human interaction, how do you see maybe robotics or anything like that that can actually accelerate or elevate that experience for the hospitality industry?
There are tons of examples of robotics that have, some have been big hits, some have been flops in the space. I look at a company out of Japan, Henna Hotels, and
Mm-hmm.
Henn space NA. There's
Mm-hmm.
one conveniently around the corner from me here in Manhattan, and they have a dinosaur at check-in. Um,
Like an actual dinosaur,
like an
like
actual
yeah.
like a
Okay.
large scale Tyrannosaurus Rex that you can interact with.
Oh, that's
They've had robotic agents in the past that looked like people but that were clearly robots. Um,
mm,
Hilton, many this is about 10 years ago at their hotel adjacent to headquarters, created a robotic concierge that looked very robotic. It was a small desktop,
mm,
had facial features, but it was clearly made of plastic and metal.
right.
They called it Connie. It was providing services for a while. And you've already noted Disney with Mickey Mouse. There are
Mm,
characters that Disney's deployed, that Universal has developed for their theme parks, where they're increasingly leveraging that technology. I think the tricky thing is figuring out which side of the uncanny valley you want to be in.
mm,
You either have to be perfectly human, which I've never seen done, or you've just got to lean into the fact that this is a robot, so what kind of robot do we want it to be? And that's where I
right.
think those examples, like having a dinosaur at check-in, is just it's a novelty,
Yeah.
but at least it's not creepy.
Right. Right. What do they call that? Like animatronics, I
Exactly,
believe.
exactly.
And I was actually recently at Universal, and I think it was Megatron from
Mhm.
Transformers. I still don't know if that's actually a robot or a human, because man, that thing responds. pretty well to inputs and very fast. Um,
Exactly, exactly.
and I had a fun time with Toad at the Super Mario universe that they recently launched at Universal. I'm pretty sure that's a little person inside that Toad costume talking to me. Not the actual
Waddling around,
robot.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you never know. For a
Um,
long time, they leveraged robots, but then they had camera placements so that somebody in a remote location was essentially
mm,
voice acting and providing voice and sound. But that's, soon the robot will be able to do that
be able to
in
act
and
on
of
itself.
itself.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so as we talk about accelerating leaders, and obviously you're leading your practice there, how have you practically integrated AI into any sort of leadership programs, consulting services? And do you have any like specific examples or success stories you can share?
hmm One of the things that we do in a lot of our programs, especially when we're working with clients who want to train, say, mid-level managers or even supervisors, we'll oftentimes include technology components there so that they can not only supplement their learning with special activities or exercises, but we also try and expose them to AI that they could then potentially use as part of their job. Um,
Mm,
we work around the world, oftentimes in places like the Caribbean or Central America, where there hasn't been as much exposure to technology as we may have had in the United States, for example.
mm.
And so, introducing people to ChatGPT and seeing their reactions to it for the first time it's amazing to watch that light bulb moment go off, and you can see the potential that they see too, which is equally exciting.
Got it, got it. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've seen with AI adoption, and every business and person is kind of like in their own adoption curve, if you will. The thing that I've seen help the most is to just show them a live example of their job, right?
Exactly.
Or when I show like an agentic capability or even something, as you mentioned, as basic as ChatGPT, all of a sudden light bulbs, right? Like I can do this now, right?
Right, right.
But there's definitely a learning curve, I think, with any sort of AI tool, just because of, as you mentioned, the UX. It's all prompt engineering.
hmm hmm
Now, not all of us are great at, first of all, writing,
Right.
but writing for AI to actually do a
Exactly.
good job. So, super interesting. Um, and then, final question: as hospitality leaders are looking to implement AI while still maintaining that service excellence, what key principles or strategies, some tips, if you will, for folks that are, obviously in the space that are looking to adopt AI, what would you tell them?
There's a model that we've leveraged in the industry for about 30 years to define the key components of service quality. It's called RADER as an abbreviation or an acronym, but it stands for reliability, assurance, tangibles, empathy, and responsiveness.
Mm,
And like I pointed out earlier when commenting that artificial intelligence can just as well be humane intelligence, I think those are five of the attributes that would help to bring that philosophy to life, making sure
mm,
from a reliability standpoint, like we talked about at the beginning, that responses are correct and complete, consistent from one to another, but also contextual based on the tone of the person asking, the tone of the organization. From an assurance standpoint, making sure that whatever is said actually gets done. From a
mm,
tangible standpoint, making sure that even something technically intangible like a digital experience on a computer screen or on a phone still portrays the quality that the organization would expect in their tone of voice. That goes back to what we are talking about from a UX standpoint with the ellipses or the how much is above or under the fold in terms of the thinking of the AI.
mm,
Empathy goes a little bit back to that context, but having a human tone that
mm,
doesn't feel too rote or scripted, and then responsiveness is perhaps where AI actually kind of comes in best in many respects. Being able to actually respond to what a guest is needing and
mm.
deliver again on that from an assurance standpoint.
Awesome. I love that framework, and I'm sure our audience can take a lot from that. As if our audience wants to find more about you and kind of what you're working on at Accelerating Leaders, where can they find you, and how can they reach out to you?
You're always welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can search for my name, Alec Dalton. I love
Mm,
to connect with colleagues on all sides of industry, whether it be within the AI space, helping people innovate at the frontiers, whether it's with hospitality organizations trying to uplevel their service. There's room for us all to play together in this space.
mm.
And then my organization, Accelerating Leaders, you can find out more about us at www.acceleratingleaders.com.
All right, awesome. Well, Alec, thanks for joining us today at Anyreach Roundtable. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and thanks
Likewise,
again.
Richard. Always great to see you too, and thanks to our listeners.